one another, inclusion, and other positive themes as we foster an inclusive and accepting culture across the district. Now on to introductions. So your trustees. On my far right, we have Trustee Tony Ward. Trustee Suzanne Perot has had to send regrets tonight. She is not feeling well, unfortunately, so we hope she gets well soon. And to my right, we also have Vice Chair Shelley Coburn, Superintendent Gord Stewart. To my far left, we have Trustee Marnie Wilson, Trustee Rod Ross, Trustee David Todd, our Secretary Treasurer Brian Isley, and we will start now at the partner table. And our partners, we have from QP 1260, Charla Major, from LTA, Wendy Cook, and also from the LTA, Tanya Kerr, and from the Langley Principals and Vice Principals Association, John Pusick. And we do not have any media here tonight, so on the staff present, we have our Assistant Secretary Treasurer, Shin Chand, Assistant Superintendent, Woody Bradford, and Assistant Superintendent Mel Gill's unable to join us today. He has a family event. And then we have Assistant Superintendent Barry Bunyan, our wonderful Laurie Mason, Executive Assistant, and our fantastic new Communications Manager, Joanne Abshire. And we also have back there, am I missing anyone? Tony. Pardon me? Anthony. Oh, sorry, Anthony, our other Communications Manager. Welcome. And we do have in attendance this evening former trustee Rosemary Wallace, who is now City Council. Welcome and thank you for joining us. Yay! And yes, we do have a guest tonight. Yay! So welcome everybody. We are now on to our report from in-camera Vice Chair Coburn.
In camera, we discussed personnel and legal.
Thank you. And so with that being said, we are on to the consent agenda. Could I please get a mover for the consent agenda? Moved by Trustee David Todd, seconded by Vice Chair Shelley Coburn. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda as presented? That's carried. We are now on to, just have to get to the right page, the Secretary Treasurer. Oh, sorry, consideration of the agenda. Could I please get a mover for the agenda? Moved by Vice Chair Coburn, seconded by Trustee David Todd. Any additions or changes of order to the agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting the agenda as presented? That is carried, and we are on to Secretary Treasurer's Report 6.1, Amended Annual Budget Bylaw for 2018-2019.
Thank you, Chair Dykeman. At this point, I'm going to call Assistant Secretary Treasurer Shin Chand, who's going to present the amended budget. But before he does that, I would like to thank him and his team for all the work that they've put in to develop the amended budget this year. They've done a fabulous job. And I just want to thank him for stepping forward tonight and presenting the budget on behalf of the district.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. I'll walk you through the 18-19 amended annual budget. So first we'll start off with our legislative authority. Subsection 113(2) of the School Act requires a Board of Education to submit an amended annual budget if the Minister of Education amends a district's operating grant. So every December we do get a grant, operating grant recalc, and this constitutes a change, so we are have to amend our annual budget. So we'll be going through that this evening. This is the format of the amended annual budget. PSAB stands for Public Sector Accounting Board. They established the accounting standards for the public sector, and the PSAB framework requires budgets to include all funds, not just the operating fund. So we'll be going through the operating fund, special purpose fund, and the capital fund. So statement 2 pulls together the revenues and expenses across all funds, as mentioned, operating, special purpose fund, and the capital fund. And it breaks down the expenses by function and also gives us the overall surplus or deficit. So for Langley School District, statement 2, as I mentioned, consolidates all the funds. Currently, our revenues are up $7,034,988 from preliminary budget. So the annual budget is the spring budget column, which was approved in the spring of 2018. The expenditures are up $7,027,848 for an overall net revenue of $5.519 million. We will be appropriating a surplus of $3,198,660 to give us an overall surplus on a consolidated basis of $8,718,065. Breaking down the revenue by fund, our operating fund is our main fund, and the majority of our funding is from the Ministry of Education. As you can see, the largest portion is the Ministry of Ed, which makes up 87% of our funding. Next largest source of funding is our tuition funding, which is international education. So our total revenues for the district is $252,485,007. Moving on to the expenses by function. Once again, we break it down by fund. Overall, on a consolidated basis, our expenses are at $246,965,602. Over 80% of the district's expenditures are in instruction. So a bulk of Langley's district's expenditures are put towards instruction. This graphic provides a comparative, how we sit compared to the provincial average. And this focuses in on the main operating grant. 85.5% of Langley's operating grant goes towards instruction compared to the provincial average, which is at 82.8. Our district admin is slightly lower than the provincial average. We're at 3.6%. The provincial average is 3.8. Our operations and maintenance comes in below the provincial average, as well as our transportation and housing. The amended annual budget tonight, we'll be asking the board to approve is $248,440,272, broken down by fund. These are the expenditures under each fund that the board will be asked to approve. Once again, the majority of our expenditures are in the operating fund. Looking at Schedule 1, our accumulated surplus, across the top is where we opened the year, ended June 30th, 2018. Our opening surplus was $16.216 million. Based on our expenditures, and that will be over our revenue and the local capital purchases. we will be in a deficit, and it'll reduce our accumulated surplus. So our new operating accumulated surplus balance will be $13,018,215. On a consolidated basis, factoring in capital, we'll be at an overall accumulated surplus of $113,473,492. Looking at the surplus appropriation for the operating fund, once again, I want to remind the board the 16,216,875,000 is where we ended the previous school year and was our opening balance. And those were the internally restricted amounts were restricted by the board. We will be planning to appropriate $3,198,660 of the internally restricted and bring the balance down to $13,018,215. We plan on utilizing the balance of the restricted capital funds over the next 1 to 2 years. There's a large amount for school generated funds of $3.139 million. Schools will be using that in this school year. The surplus appropriation from operating, the $2,377,253 was approved by the board in the spring. The following amounts we're asking for to be appropriated are the district initiatives to support schools, $150,000. Internally restricted for infrastructure replacement, another $150,000. Internally restricted for admin support, $125,000. And school surpluses carried forward from the 17-18 school year, those will be brought in as well into 18-19. So the grand total of surplus appropriation will be $3,198,660. So the board motions required this evening to appropriate the following restricted surplus amounts. Once again, $150,000 for the district initiative in support of schools, $150,000 internally restricted for infrastructure replacement, $125,000 for internally restricted for admin support in schools, and the $396,407 of carry forward surpluses at schools. After we appropriate those restricted surpluses, the new balance for budgeted surplus will be $13,018,215. And as I mentioned, there's a plan to spend these restricted surpluses over the next 1 to 2 school years. Now we'll move into the operating fund, which is our main operational fund and the largest fund revenue-wise and expenditure-wise. So these are the schedules that we'll be going through. Overall, the total revenue in the operating fund has increased $1.3 million from the spring budget. Expenses have increased by $1.5 million. And there is an additional $1.334 million in local capital expenditures that are funded by the operating fund. So this puts us in an overall deficit of $3,198,660. We'll be utilizing appropriating surpluses from prior years to balance our budget off, and this is an increase of $821,407 from our spring budget. Taking a closer look at our operating fund revenue, our main funding source, the Ministry of Ed, our grant has increased $880,236 from the spring. Provincial grants other have declined slightly. Tuition revenue is up. The main driver for that is our international ed program. Other revenues are up slightly. Rental and leases static. Investment income has gone up $200,000. This is mainly due to higher interest rates. We're getting better return on our deposits with a central deposit program and with our bank. Just wanted to show you a graphic of how much of our operating grant it comes from the Ministry of Ed. It's a huge piece of the pie. The next largest funding source is our international tuition. Looking at our main operating grant, the main driver in there is our enrollment based funding, which this year declined from the spring. We were about 80 below our projection, so this brought our revenues in slightly lower on enrollment-based funding. Our unique student needs is up due to special ed level 2 being up around 47 identified, and level 3 funding was up 7, so that gave us an additional $916,066 in unique student funding. Supplements other is up $163,467. This is mainly salary differential funding from the Ministry of Education. We've also put in an amount for the economic stability dividend of $262,459. This is for support and teacher increases. Contractually, they're getting an increase come May 1st of 0.75%. So for the last 2 months, we've factored in about $262,459 that we'll be receiving from the Ministry of Ed. Funding for graduated adults is also up slightly, up around $100,000. So overall, our Ministry of Ed grant is up $880,236 for the 18-19 year. Tuition revenue, as I mentioned earlier, is mainly driven by our ISP program. The regular program is up $276,750, which equates to about an additional 20.5 FTE in international students. The summer program is down slightly for ISP. Continuing ed is up slightly. So overall, we're up $254,955 for tuition revenue. Our other revenue, overall, it's up $93,224. The Langley Education Center fees, we've reclassed them and put them up with tuition, so that's why that's down $42,000. The BMO rebate is a rebate we get on all our purchasing card transactions overall. So as our volume of transactions increase, dollar amount, we get a rebate back on that. So we're projecting that to be up around $15,500. Our salary recovery account, which is basically funds that we receive for related to secondments, work safe claims, and ICBC, it's up due to the number of claims. A lot of the funding comes in there and then gets paid out to staff. Now we'll look at the expenditure side, Schedule 2B for operating. Overall, the expenditures in the operating fund are up $1.5 million. $948,249 of that under salaries. Benefits are down $640,885. Services and supplies are up $1,195,778. I'll go through in more detail for each category and give you some variance analysis on that. Teacher salaries down as mentioned. We reduced the elementary by 2 divisions due to not meeting enrollment projections. We also had put in a contingency for 3 divisions in the spring. We have taken that out also for enrollment projections being down. We have added a 1.0 FTE teacher in career ed for the youth apprenticeship program. There are additional secondary career ed blocks. We added funding to schools. Summer session teachers are down slightly. We've added some additional ELL time. Late starts in schools overall has caused us to be down roughly 398,000 for late start for vacancies. But you'll see on the flip side later on where we're go down to substitutes that TTOC costs are up to cover off these late starts and vacancies. Principals and vice principals are up overall $123,804. We added some admin time that was necessary at RE Mountain and Yorkson Creek Middle School to assist with the middle school conversion. Also, we added some VP admin mentoring for our schools, and we had funding put aside and restricted to cover off most of this expenditure. We also have principal and VP salary increases. There's also a position change. The district principal for HR became the director, so it was a shift from principal to exempt. So that brought down the principal salaries by $130,000. And then there were some other adjustments. Education assistants are up $493,870 overall. We've added 24 additional SEAs into the system. We did have a contingency of $300,000, which we removed and allocated out to schools. There were some late start vacancies for SEAs as well. Changes in support staff. We had some central late start and vacancies in the clerical and support area. There was also some reduction in noon supervisor time. Maintenance added 2 bus drivers. One was these were for additional routes. We also added 1.0 FTE custodial due to an increased classroom space in the district, going back to the restored language. And there was also another half FTE of maintenance support added. Other professionals are up $229,703. There 24,000 of that was exempt pay increases. Another 14,180 in board pay increases. We added purchasing position, 1.0 FTE, HR manager position, 1.0 FTE. I want you to keep in mind that these were late starts. These 2 positions, the purchasing position started in November, the HR manager in December, so this isn't the full impact of their salary. As mentioned before, the HR position changed, the district principal moving over to the director position, added to the overall other professional salaries. We also had an assistant soup that was working 0.2 FTE and 0.8 with BC SSA. They have retired now, so we're taking that out of the budget. So that gives us our change in other professionals. Substitutes costs have increased overall $677,000 from preliminary budget. A large portion of this, as mentioned earlier, is for teacher late starts for unfilled vacancies, 421,000 of that. And 98,000 is for SEA and support late starts to schools. Casual replacement in central for SEAs in schools has also increased by 46,634. This is for SEAs deployed in the fall. There's also an increase in TTOC costs for the Action Plan for Learning grant. This is the TTOC portion relating to the release time for this grant. Casual replacements for central, that includes $675,000 for casual custodians and another $312,000 for casual maintenance and transportation staffing. The benefits are down overall $640,885. Teacher pension plan rates for the employer have declined from 13.23% to 11.3%, a reduction of 1.93%. This has resulted in an overall savings of roughly $1 million to the district in benefit costs. We are also wrapping up the Langley pension plan, and final wind-up costs have come in at $315,000. This is an old legacy pension plan, not any of our current pension plans. There are a few members left in this pension plan. The insurance company that has bought up the assets will continue to pay these remaining members. Now we'll go into the services and supplies area. Overall services and supplies have increased by $1,195,778. I'll go through the different objects and explain some of the variances. Services have increased by $563,094. We have contracted with KPMG to do our first wave of internal audits at schools. These will be starting next week. HR consulting and administrative costs are up. Some of it is due to investigations, but a majority of this is for increases for negotiation and bargaining year, so that has increased for this year. Also, advertising has increased in HR for advertising for positions. We are conducting an ERP systems audit in HR and payroll, as well as adding modules to streamline some of our processes. So this is adding a cost of $91,250. We have some for ERAC. We have the Adobe licenses, $37,000. We've added some classroom enhancements for schools. That's adding $11,000 to the services budget. Bank charges are going up $9,500. We've increased, this is due to an initiative at schools to reduce the physical cash at schools. So we have introduced cashless schools, so the KEV program. It allows parents to pay online, but associated with this are increased bank charges. More transactions means higher bank charges for us. Photocopier volumes have increased and associated equipment costs have increased as well. As we get into the supplies area, we've also increased the recovery amount to offset this increase in expenditures. So it's pretty much a wash. We will also be archiving our historical counseling files to free up space at schools and digitize them and get rid of some of these boxes and free up space. MyEd BC fees have gone up $39,664 for the school year, mainly due to enrollment. Carbon tax increases, $24,000. We receive funding to offset this in the following year. Innovative projects at schools. Overall, the schools on a consolidated basis have increased their budgets by $25,325. Increase in Pro-D and travel by $71,933. $18,200 of that is board governance training, with the new board coming in. Staff development and leadership has gone up by $32,300. Mileage and travel costs are up as well, $21,433. Overall, our supplies have increased by $432,768. $24,000 of that is student cultural activities under Aboriginal. General school supply budgets have increased by $179,933. School maintenance requests have increased by $44,510. The action plan for learning grant supplies portion of the grant to schools, we have restricted funds to cover off the TTOC portion and the supplies portion. So that's putting in $137,860 for schools. The recovery, as I mentioned earlier, to offset the increased photocopier costs. Playground wood chips, just kind of general maintenance around playgrounds that needed new wood chips, various schools across the district, $41,000 grounds costs. Computer hardware budgets on a consolidated basis at schools have gone up $73,037. Audio-visual equipment for the board office, $70,000. Instructional services has purchased Doublethink My Blueprint software. So this is a district license for careers K-12 and portfolio, and it's also core competencies online platform software. And that was around $35,700. Our utilities have gone up $126,508. Natural gas prices have seen a lot of volatility over the winter, largely caused by the rupture of the Enbridge pipeline. Prices have gone up and down, so we've settled at around $88,508 right now as an increase over the spring. In the spring, we added around $20,000. So overall, we've increased our natural gas budget by around $108,000 from 17-18. Water and sewer has gone up $48,000. That's mainly water costs from the township of Langley for watering our fields. Drier weather, hotter summers, so we're paying more for our water costs. Hazardous materials disposal, we reduced that budget by $10,000. That's basically for science labs and other at schools. So we reduced the budget by about 10 grand. Now we'll shift over to the special purpose fund. Under public sector accounting standards, any monetary contribution from an external source that meets the definition of a liability under PSAP has to be reported in the special purpose fund. So basically, only restricted contributions received from an external source can be reported in the special purpose fund. So we'll go through the different programs in special purpose fund. Overall, revenues have increased by $5.8 million in the Ministry of Ed area, and that's mostly the Classroom Enhancement Fund. Correspondingly, the expenditures have also gone up by the same amount. I want to mention 96% of the special purpose fund is spent directly on instruction. So looking at the different programs within the special purpose fund, the annual facilities grant, this isn't the entire amount. A large portion is within the capital fund. This is a small portion within the special purpose. So it's gone up $117,000. This is mainly carry forward amounts. Learning Improvement Fund is up $81,000, also carry forward. Service delivery transformation, carry forward that wasn't spent in the previous fiscal year. Community Link funding has gone up 177,983. That's also carry forward from 17-18. The main increase is, as I mentioned, the classroom enhancement fund. It's gone up 5.4 million. The main reason is due to the ministry's stage funding approach. So in the spring, when they gave us our allocation, they didn't take into account remedy costs, overhead, the additional ELL teachers. So that's why there's a variance there. The CEF funding, classroom enhancement funding, is broken down as follows: 16.3 million for teacher staffing and their benefits, $783,000 for overhead, and $3 million for remedy. At the bottom there, school generated funds. That's all the school bank accounts. It's pretty much static, hasn't changed much from the spring. It's down slightly. Schedule 4, we'll look at our capital fund. So under public sector accounting standards, we budget for transactions in the capital fund in accordance with whether the revenue and expense is related to local capital or invested in capital assets. So these capital expenditures, local capital expenditures, all funded by the operating fund. And DW Poppy renovations, $500,000. Computer hardware, so these are items greater than 3,000 that we capitalize, $188,411. Portable costs, $150,000. School board office revitalization costs, $150,000. Vehicles down at maintenance, $200,000. Peter Ewart Middle School conversion costs, $100,000 for this school year. They're going to be ordering some equipment that'll get in by hopefully by June 30th. So for this year, we put in $100,000. Subsequent school year, we'll be allocating more dollars towards the conversion costs. But for now, we've allocated $100,000. We had to update our communication system on our buses. They were failing, not working properly. So we've upgraded all our radio communication within our buses. And that was $46,000. So now we've gone through all our funds, operating, special purpose, capital. The amended annual budget bylaw amount for 2018-19 is $248,440,272. And as mentioned earlier, the board motions required to pass to appropriate the following restricted surplus amounts: $150,000 for district initiative in support of schools, $150,000 for internally restricted for an infrastructure replacement, $125,000 internally restricted for admin support in schools, and $396,407 for school surpluses carrying forward from 2017-18 into 18-19. Also want to remind the board again that they've already restricted $2,377,253 to balance the 2018-19 preliminary budget. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the in-depth report and update. It was wonderful how you went through each one of the steps and shared so much information. I do have a speakers list. Normally we would get a motion on the floor before we started to go through the motions that we do have to pass tonight, which there are quite a few. But as the questions you may have on the report may not go directly to whichever motion we pass first, I will just open it up to questions on the presentation to start. And the first name I have on the speakers list is Trustee Ross.
Thank you, and Great presentation again. So grateful. We have international student revenues. $15 million is what we've gotten going through our district coffers. Can you imagine what we would have to cut from our budget if we didn't have that? Many school districts don't have anything like that in this province. So I just really applaud this district for its willingness to go down this road, because it certainly has created wonderful opportunities for our students and for our teachers and their schools, etc. I appreciate your fresh eyes. You said there's going to be an increase of 0.75 May 1st for teachers. Is that what you said? 0.75. Okay. Is that for TOCs too? I'm a TOC. I want to know if I want to get a raise. Oh, yep. Oh, yep. Oh, okay. Well,
Just a second, the secretary treasurer did you?
I believe it does, yes.
okay, great. Wow, that's good news. Thanks. Now, here's my real question. The first one was selfish. What I'd like to know is the provincial government came through a budget last week, and basically there didn't seem to be any changes. We didn't see any changes to community links, some of the big dollar figures, the Swiss dollars. We didn't see anything happen there that was a big surprise. Is there any winds of change or clouds ahead of us that you or the Secretary Treasurer would like to alert this board and the public to?
When it comes to the funding announcement that was done, there wasn't a lot of additional monies in our operating funds that would be coming to districts, with the exception of the healthcare tax. They are planning to try to make districts whole on that. Whether that works out for dollar, we aren't clear because we haven't been told what that is yet. They have set up a structural amount in that budget as to what the ongoing increased cost is because of the change between the MSP premium and the healthcare tax, and they are going to use contingency to bridge next year where there's an extra amount that isn't an ongoing cost. So there's next year is the most expensive year under this because it's in a bit of a transition. So they have structurally dealt with that, which is new money coming in, but it's to cover off a cost that districts are already absorbing. For this year, we will be in a shortfall position due to that change because there is no funds yet coming in from that. There is a potential for some funds coming in for the back part of the year from April to June, but not enough to cover the cost that we've absorbed this year. The concerns coming forward, I'll get into more detail at the next meeting, but it's the funding model and how that's going to impact not only this district but this province. So there's been a recommendation from some of the work that has been done that will be presented to trustees and the public with some of our thoughts on that going forward.
Thank you very much.
So I now have Trustee Todd.
Thank you. So thank you again for going over very thoroughly. So you talked about late starts, and you said the TTOC costs were kind of built into late starts. TTOC costs went up, but then late starts accounted for that fact, so it was kind of a bit of a wash. One thing you did say that stood out, well, two things: teachers' pension plan saving of almost $1 million, which is good news for our district. The other one is counseling files, and I assume you mean school counselors. For years they've kept notes, and now we're digitizing them, and you put a cost of archiving them, basically $50,000. Is that $50,000 annually, or just kind of a one-time hit?
One time. Sorry. That's a one-time cost to get us up, everything digitized and get everything up to snuff. And then moving forward, I think we'll be looking at a solution to digitize moving forward, so we don't have paper files.
Thank you. Now I have Trustee Ward.
Is it on? Do I press anything? Okay. Two questions. If I'm allowed to have two questions. What's the net loss for the online payment? So you've got bank charges, and so we've adopted this new methodology so that bank charges, what were our costs associated with at the schools with taking cash compared to, I'm trying to do a comparison between what we're incurring now compared to what we had before as far as administrative costs. Oh,
I don't have that information. I can do that analysis for you and get that to you in trustee memo, but I don't have that offhand.
Sorry, can I just add to that? It was a decision made a few years back for a couple of reasons. Not all of it was cost-based. Some of it was student safety, getting cash out of schools. When people find out that there's large amounts of cash in a school, it becomes a risk to staff and students. So the district set up a process that started off with couriers going in and regularly taking the funds out, and then we implemented the KEV model, which would streamline processes for teachers, clerical, and also get more the cash out of the buildings, because that was a decision the district made, not just on a cost basis, but on a safety basis.
well, I'll have another one. Okay. And then the other question, I don't know if you did address it. I might have. If you did, my apologies. $10,000 for hazardous material. There was a line item there, and so was that a grant? Because it was in part of my lack of accounting, but it was in brackets compared to the our costs, our expenditures.
No, it was a budget reduction.
Oh, budget. It was a budget reduction. So
Reduce the amount of budget.
so typically we have that.
Sorry?
So typically we have costs associated
we
with.
still have a budget for hazardous material removal. We just reduced the amount.
Okay. So asbestos or that type of thing, or
No, it's not related to that. It's related to removing
oh, okay,
from labs and science
okay,
classes.
makes sense.
All right, so I have Trustee Coburn and then Trustee Wilson.
So I'm just curious about the roughly $40,000 in My Ed BC fees. My experience with My Ed BC is that it's not been fantastic. I'm just confused. Is it mandatory that we use My Ed BC? I think it is, and if it is, why are we paying fees on it? And why are we paying fees for something that's not working? These aren't rhetorical questions.
Wow, there's a loaded question. All the districts share in the cost of My Ed BC, and it's done on a per student basis and is recalculated on an annual basis as to the costs to support that system. I'm not sure it doesn't work. To your statement, there's a lot that does work in My Ed BC. It's a system that the district wouldn't be able to operate without. We would need a system to do what it does. Does it do everything perfectly? Absolutely not. Are they constantly working on making improvements? Yes, they are, and they have made some significant progress on it over the last couple of years. There's still things that need to be done, but for the district to undertake a system like that on its own, the cost would be exponentially higher.
Okay, so just in follow-up, so how many years have we been using My Ed BC first? And then my second question is it similar to the other online platforms that some teachers are using? And do they have to use My Ed BC for reporting out?
I'm trying to remember. My Ed is probably 3 years, three and a half, something like that. Maybe 4 years. Yeah, like I think this is the 4th school year that we've used it. It's been a phased transition. Sorry, Trustee Coleman, I forgot your second part of that question. So yes, they do have to use it for reporting. That's the mechanism for reporting out grades to parents.
And can it come in any other mechanism, or does it have to go through that one?
It has to go through that one.
Thank you.
Right. And the last speaker I have on the list is Trustee Wilson.
One full-time custodian. I think I'm on.
Yeah.
I think it's working.
Oh, sorry.
So, but I'll push it now. So, and it said in regards to the teacher's contract. So does that mean that out of all the new classroom spaces and portables and things created to comply with the class sizes, that we've only had to hire one extra full-time custodian?
Well, we've also received funding under classroom, and we've also received funding under the Classroom Enhancement Fund. We've received funding for 2.625 FTE, so we've added that. This was an additional FTE, so the hours were spread out at different schools, but it equated to an FTE. So total, we've added about, if you include the operating and the CEF, 3.625 FTE. Yep.
All right, there we go. So, seeing no further speakers, we do have a few motions to roll through. So, the first one is the amended annual budget bylaw 2018-19. And the first motion is that the Board of Education approves staff to appropriate or unrestrict the following restricted surplus amounts: $396,407 for school surpluses, $150,000 district initiatives to support schools, $150,000 internally restricted for infrastructure replacement, and $125,000 internally restricted for admin development. Could I please have a mover? Moved by Trustee Ward, seconded by Vice Chair Coburn. Any other questions or comments on that motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? The motion is carried. We are now on to the annual amended annual budget bylaw. So the first motion is that the school district number 35 Langley amended annual bylaw 2018-2019 in the amount of $248,440,272 be given first reading. May I please get a mover? Moved by Trustee Todd, seconded by Trustee Wilson. Any questions or comments on that? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion is carried. The second motion is that the school district number 35 Langley amended annual budget bylaw 2018-19 in the amount of $248,440,272 be given second reading. May I please get a mover? Moved by Vice Chair Coburn, seconded by Trustee Ross. Any comments or questions on that? Seeing none, all those in favor? Motion is carried. The next motion must be unanimous. So the motion is that the Board of Education of School District number 35 Langley approves having all three readings of the amended annual budget bylaw 2018-2019 in the amount of $248,440,272 at tonight's meeting. May I please get a mover? Moved by Trustee Ross, seconded by Trustee Ross, seconded by Trustee Todd. You've merged into one person. Once again, this motion needs to be unanimous. All those in favor? Motion is carried unanimously. And the last motion is that School District number 35 Langley amended annual budget bylaw 2018-2019 in the amount of $248,440,272 be given third reading, passed and adopted on this, the 26th day of February 2019. May I please get a mover? Moved by Vice Chair Coburn, seconded by Trustee Ross. Any comments or questions on that? Seeing none, all those in favor, motion's carried unanimously. All right, so now that we've gotten through that, barely, we're going to move on to the superintendent's reports. We're on to 7.1 information items, and 7.1.1 is the BC Tripartite Education Agreement. Superintendent.
Thank you, Chair Dyke. At this point, I'd like to call on our District Principal of Programs, Mike Pugh. He's going to speak to the BC Tripartite Education Agreement. There are commitments to our district with respect to transportation, and there are other aspects to the agreement that we want to make sure you're informed of. Also, that you recognize that there are three different agreements. There's the education agreement, and there's an enhancement agreement, and there's a tripartite agreement. It's really important that you're clear on the distinction between all three and the commitments we have with respect to them. So I will call on once the siren ends for for Mike to take over. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm here, as Superintendent Stewart alluded to talk about the BC Tripartite Agreement. but also to give you some framework around the other governing documents for our Aboriginal education program. And of course, I know we've already recognized this as a board, but as always, we want to make sure that we do recognize that we are on the ancestral unceded territories of the Kwantlen, the Katzie, and the Matsqui and Semiahmoo First Nations, and that we are honored to be here tonight doing the work that we do to inspire all learners to reach their full potential. As I go through this presentation, one of the things I want to frame it around is this learning lens of First Peoples principles of learning. And so first and most importantly is that learning is relational. As we go through this, we are all connected. And it's important that we learn together and that we learn in a social way, and that in doing so, that helps to nurture the family, it helps to nurture the community, it helps to nurture everything we do. And so we look at this tonight as going forward in a relational way. It also recognizes the role of Indigenous knowledge. For so long, Indigenous knowledge has been held as something less than, something that doesn't amount to what our Western Eurocentric views will hold. But a lot of these documents do take in and really give a role for Indigenous knowledge. And the key piece to that is that in doing so, it honors the Indigenous knowledge. It allows our Indigenous students to see themselves reflected in the curriculum and in the school and in the work that we do. And it also allows our non-Indigenous students to essentially learn more to bridge that gap. And so to start so that we can begin to work together and continue on our journey of reconciliation. And finally, ultimately, learning does support the well-being, not only the well-being of the self, but the family, the community, the land, the spirits, and the ancestors. And so everything that we have in these guiding documents will ultimately support the well-being of everyone who's connected to it. So as Superintendent Stewart alluded to, we do have 3 guiding documents. The tripartite agreement is the newest one, and I'll discuss that one last. But for now, what we'll talk about is our enhancement agreement. And this is the amazing document. It is really our guiding document for our district that is specific to our district. Enhancement agreements started from the Ministry of Education, and they are a document that the ministry asked was agreed upon between the district and the local First Nations to support all Aboriginal learners. So the key piece to this is that this is a document that was built in conjunction with YAISTAL, which is our Aboriginal Advisory Board, made up of representatives from our 4 local nations, the Lower Fraser Valley Aboriginal Society, Waichia, our Aboriginal program, and representation from the district. And that this enhancement agreement is around increasing success for all Aboriginal learners. In our district, we have roughly 2,000 self-identifying Aboriginal students. About 99% of them live off of reserve and are not directly connected to our local 4 nations. And that includes students who may self-identify as Métis and as Inuit. And so it's not just First Nations students in that respect. But this document is the overarching guiding document for success for all Aboriginal students. And it has 2 very simple goals. And I should also take one step back and allude to, as I talked about, this was a document that the ministry stepped in and said we need to start working on as districts with our local nations. The ministry has since, as of 2016, stepped back and said we're doing a good job in terms of the districts overall across the province are doing a good job creating enhancement agreements. And they have taken themselves out of this process. Now, our enhancement agreement is good until 2020, but we fully intend to sign another one and continue forward with this. Just because the ministry has stepped back, we still believe in this document and the work that it sets out for us to do. And so we will continue with it. Goal number 1 is quite simply, if you take all those words, it's about building relationships. So this goes back to that learning is relational. We need to establish trusting, respectful partnerships between the district, the program, the local nations, the local associations and societies, everyone who works together for our Aboriginal students to ensure that we increase successes and outcomes for our students. The second goal is based around creating strength-based, personalized, student-centered learning that respects Aboriginal history, culture, values, and nurtures, most importantly, nurtures a sense of belonging for the success of all students. This is where a lot of our work happens for our program, in that we do the other things, the strength-based, the personalized learning, the student-centered learning, through the lens of creating that sense of belonging. How do we make sure, and this is good for not only for all Aboriginal students, but for all students. How do we make sure that they feel like they belong, that they are connected, and that they are part of the system that they are going to on a daily basis? So that is our Aboriginal Education Enhancement Agreement, which we would commonly refer to, because everyone loves acronyms, we commonly refer to as the EA. Don't want to confuse that now with an LEA, or a Local Education Agreement. So a Local Education Agreement, or LEA, is an agreement specifically between a local First Nation and the school board around how educational services are provided. And in our district, we have one that is signed, and that is between our district and the Kwantlen First Nation. So an LEA deals only with students who live on reserve as part of that nation. So in terms of currently, I believe roughly 20 students live on reserve at the Kwantlen First Nation. So this, our local education agreement, applies only to those 20 students and how we deliver it. This is a legal binding document. So it involves how we purchase those educational services, how we deliver different aspects of education, but it is a legal document, and when you read it, you will see a distinct difference between an LEA and REA. There is a big push on right now to start to get more LEAs. And the reason for it more than anything is that it builds a relationship between the district and that specific community. We have a very unique circumstance here in that, like I said, 99% of our students actually live off of reserve. But in a number of districts, it would be almost the reverse, that 99% of their students are living on reserve, and the importance of these agreements with their local nations is even more so. But for us, it is a great, important first step in building that relationship with a specific First Nation. I should also, I lost my train of thought there, but I should also add that in terms of this, there is the ability for two nations to join together and say, we like the same agreement, and so we'll sign off on it as well, as long as those nations are in agreement that they will work together on that. So theoretically, another nation could join Kwantlen's and sign off and say, we will go with the same agreement and join on together. But as I said, it's an important mechanism because it does build the relationships, but it does put in structures to improve educational outcomes and opportunities for First Nations on reserve students. More often than not, we have a lot of difficulties when we have miscommunication. And the miscommunication will often come around just unclear roles and expectations for all parties involved. So this local education agreement goes to clarify exactly what the roles and expectations are for all parties involved, and that we can then speak to making sure that we're all doing our work. And importantly, built into that too is a connection to parents in the community in terms of how they can involve themselves in the education of their students living on reserve. So that brings us now to the BC Tripartite Education Agreement, or what I will refer to going forward as BCT. That's the acronym they've given it. Like I said, everyone loves acronyms in this world. This was signed January 23rd, 2019. It is essentially a larger local education agreement. It is, as if you would, a local education agreement for the province. It is signed between the Government of Canada, the Provincial Government of British Columbia, and FNESC, the First Nations Education Steering Committee, who works as an advisory group and representative group for all First Nations. The BC Tripartite Education Agreement, or BCT, sets out not only certain expectations for public schools, but a lot of the things within it also focus on First Nations schools on reserve or in their communities, where we have seen over the years a drastic separation between the funding that we receive for our Aboriginal students and the funding that those schools receive. And so there are a number of things in place in the document that speak to supporting First Nations schools and their communities to help improve outcomes for their students that are attending their schools or private schools. And there are some that work for all of us and for public schools. So specific highlights, and when I say these are highlights for BCT, these are highlights that really affect us as a public school system. There is, as I said, a push for a requirement. Previously, a First Nation could come and say, we would like to have an LEA, and the district could say, well, I'm not sure we can make that work right now. It may not be feasible for us. The essential requirement here is that if a nation puts forward and says, we want to have an LEA, then we will work with them to make sure that they have that LEA in place. There needs to be a transportation plan. One of the glaring things that stands out in the data for our Aboriginal students is that often they are not being successful in school because they are not able to make it to school, and that they are held, essentially held back because of certain policies within boards that make it difficult for them to get to school. In terms of around transportation, and certainly it's very different across this province and across from district to district as to what they face in terms of transportation needs. But this is one of the things that it outlines. For every First Nation, the district must have a transportation plan for those students to ensure they get to school. There is now a requirement in there of one professional development day a year in each district focused on enhancing First Nation student learning outcomes. There are going to be, going forward, changes to how we report on First Nation student outcomes. That is not only how, I shouldn't say just on how we report, but also on the data that is collected and shared with us and reported back to us by the government. There will be more specific things, whereas in the past certain things may have been masked because of low numbers. They will find ways to get us that information going forward. A development of an Indigenous language policy with an implementation plan and full course offerings. Currently, the only ministry language policy in existence is one for French as a second language. And all languages that we deliver are then based off of that policy. That policy does not fit with Indigenous languages. And so there is currently work being done by FINESC and the ministry around the creation of a specific Indigenous language policy. And then work will be on all the districts, the individual districts and nations to then develop course offerings and languages that are local to their communities. We need to collaborate to identify necessary improvements to support First Nation students with special needs. While most of this in the document does focus on our First Nation schools, this is also true still. There is some expectations around changes for how we support Aboriginal students with special needs in BC schools. Ensuring that First Nation students will receive at least the same level of services and programs that are generally available to others. As I alluded to earlier, this is mostly for our First Nation schools that were not receiving funding rates similar to what we would receive. In fact, they were receiving much less. And this is pushing to make sure that our Aboriginal students across the board, no matter whether they attend a public school, an independent school, or a First Nation school, are receiving those same services. And that we build in structures, if needed, to support students who transition from one to the other. So when a student transitions from a First Nation school to a local community public school, there needs to ensure that there are services in place to ensure that they don't get lost in the shuffle or lose out as a result of their change. And finally, is this work around culturally relevant services and programs and additional supports. And this is including engaging with a team called the First Nations Educational Outcome Improvement Teams. Now, we'll say first that overall there's a great deal of feeling that this is kind of a strange name and not necessarily an appropriate name for what we want them to do. But because it's in the legal document and that's the way it's named, that's the way that the ministry will keep this team's name. The intention is for this team to go into districts that are struggling to provide success to their Indigenous students, and that they would work with this team that will be based, we really don't know what the makeup of the team will be going forward, but that they would come in and in specific certain situations be able to work with the districts to try to enhance success for Aboriginal students. In terms of, for us, our next steps, we are currently meeting with our local First Nations to develop plans for transportation and to have discussions around whether there is a need on their part or whether they're able to sign off on LEAs. As I said, LEAs are legal binding documents, and so as such, there is a great deal of legal representation needed as part of it. And if a particular nation doesn't necessarily have access to those services, or someone within their nation who is a lawyer to help with that process, it can be quite time-consuming and monetarily quite consuming. However, one of the things that FINESC and through the BC Tripartite Agreement, one of the things they have been able to do is they're working to create a standard provincial-wide template that essentially we could fill out to match our needs, but to help with that piece around the legal aspects going forward. We are currently looking at planning for our district-wide Pro D Day for next year, and that is for the 2019-2020 school year. This is obviously not just going to be the program, the Aboriginal program that's responsible for that. We are working with Yayastal and our local nations to ensure that they are working with us and have a say in what goes on that day. We would work with instructional services, with our learning support services department, with professional services as we go forward to ensure that all teachers are engaged in discussing enhancing outcomes for Aboriginal students. We'll continue to monitor and report on educational outcomes of all Aboriginal students. So that continues to go back to the work we do in the enhancement agreement. It continued to do the work through the framework for enhancing student learning, and we will continue to do our best to ensure that we see a decrease in that equity gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous students. And finally, we'll continue to support and develop plans for furthering the Hunkaminam language classes. Currently, we have a grade 5 and then a 6-7 class at both Fort Langley Elementary and at Dorothy Peacock Elementary. Our grade 6-7 class from Fort Langley had the honor of going out to the Ruskin Dam last, 2 weeks now, and be able to sing a song in the local languages when Brandon Gabriel, one of the local artists from Kwantlen, had his artwork that is up on the Ruskin Dam when it was unveiled, and they were there to support him. And of course, that class is taught by Sesmalot Fern Gabriel, who is an amazing part of our program as well. And we're hearing more and more. We're seeing the power that language has for our students. We're seeing the great power that it has to help keep them connected. We're also seeing the power that it has for our non-Indigenous students who are getting to take it and the learning that they are going on, the learning journey they're on. But of course, speaking of learning journeys, we continue on our journey of reconciliation. And that's most important here, that as much as we have these wonderful documents, one that is very easy to read, one that is full of legal documentation, but still a great read, we continue on this journey of reconciliation, and everything we do needs to fit with our work around reconciliation. And understanding that we can still continue to push reconciliation, but it is still a very personal journey. And that where everyone is at is a different place, and that is fine. But we need to continue to move forward, and we need to continue to push people to move forward on this journey of reconciliation. Because as much as we move forward and we worry about numbers and what's in these documents, that we remember from the strategic plan where it says our children are our most precious resource, our medicine and our future leaders. And from Chief Marilyn Gabriel, who says we must continue to look for every child's gift, because every child does have that gift. And we need to nurture it, and we need to make it strong. And that is the most important work we do. So as much as I said we have these governing documents, that is our work right there. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That was a fantastic presentation. And we do have a speakers list. We have some questions for you. And the speaker on the list is Trustee Ross.
I'm excited about all the exciting things you're doing, like new languages, talking about transportation, this outcome improvement team, stuff like that. Where's the money coming from? We don't really get a lot of money from the feds on this. Provincial government, are they talking about throwing some more money at us? I just see some growing expenditures here, and I'm just curious to know what your knowledge is, or what the Secretary Treasurer's knowledge is on where we're getting the money to pay for some of this stuff. I think it's wonderful.
In terms of transportation, I'm not going to lie, I don't understand the budgetary, I'll leave that to Secretary Treasurer. My understanding is that within some of the funding grants that we receive, there is a reallocation for transportation that can be requested and provided for that. My understanding is there is no new money in terms of the transportation piece. The First Nations outcome teams, those types of things, that is being funded, my understanding, from the federal, the agreement between the federal and the provincial governments within the funds there, and there would be no cost to us in terms of that side of things. And transportation, we can look at a number of different, it's quite interesting as we do these transportation plans and we talk to different districts. For us, really, a lot of the transportation when we talk to our local nations is around looking at how do we improve where bus stops are. How do we help support in those cases where a bus may not make sense because financially we still need to be fiscally responsible, and sending a bus somewhere for one child, although important, may not make a lot of sense. But we may have the ability to support in other ways going forward. And across the province, the transportation requirements are quite there's just a drastic difference from one to the next when you start to look at those that involve ferries and boats and all sorts of things. So for us in our district, I don't foresee a massive cost in terms of what we're looking at, but we are looking and working with the nations to meet their requests. And as I said, a lot of their requests are just, our parents are driving, our parents are providing transportation in one way. How can we provide an allowance or some support for them, which is something we do.
Thank you. Next on the speakers list, we have Trustee Wilson.
Great presentation, and I'm glad we're putting so much energy towards reconciliation and moving forward with this. I just have a quick question about the Pro-D. Do we have a date picked out for what Pro-D Day it would be? And also, have we started working on what the content would be for the district-wide Pro-D?
The short answer is no. It would have to be one of either the October Pro-D Day, which is the provincial day, the February Pro-D Day that we have, or the May Pro-D. Those are the other days that we have available within our district. And at this point, we're still in discussions as a group about which day we feel would be best. There are positives and negatives to all of them. Then from there, in terms of the content and how we go forward, recognizing with specific nations, there's different things at play in terms of in Aldergrove and the full Aldergrove schools. That's where a lot of our students from Matsqui attend. So does there need to be a specific focus there around Matsqui students? Walnut Grove sees where our Catesy students are. Kwantlen students, for the most part, are at Poppy, Fine Arts, Fort Langley Elementary. So do we want to focus specifically with our nations to make it different there, or do we want to, across the district, have a more holistic, all-encompassing, inclusive view? Those are things we're still working through.
Thank you. So I have Trustee Todd, and then I have Trustee Coburn.
Thank you. I really appreciate your words. I think it's about time. There's some of what's here is just, well, of course. Why have we done this? Something like transportation could make a huge difference in a student's life, just that getting to school. And it's something that maybe we've just overlooked for a long time. Something as simple as transportation, getting them to school, is going to improve their outcomes. So much appreciated. I wasn't clear when you talked about transportation with the tripartite agreement. Is that for First Nations or for all Aboriginal students, or is it?
The tripartite agreement is only for First Nations students on reserve. So it only deals, it doesn't deal with all Aboriginal students. Like a local education agreement, it's very specific to who it deals with.
So my follow-up. Around leveling up, that's another thing that just, what took so long? Because we know that many of these schools were federal schools, and they were in the neighborhood of funding of about 75 to 80% of what the provincial, just within 50 miles, and as a result, those schools suffered.
Well, and to that point, I think, to be very specific, students suffered. And staff within the building suffered because they didn't have the resources to help their students at the same level. I have my own personal opinions as to what's taken so long in terms of the federal government and the provincial government adding that, but won't necessarily share that here. But I think it's just time to celebrate the fact that at least they're doing it and they've recognized that, and we're moving forward because too many students have suffered. And as much as we talk about very specific pieces of the residential school system that had a very distinct effect and long-lasting effect, the continued underfunding, the continued under-support of our First Nations, which has then resulted in a higher proportionate level of students in care. It's just an ongoing thing, and part of the reason I included that picture there is of my daughter, Michaela, and Avery, who is one of our Aboriginal support workers' daughters. And I have permission, I made sure to get permission to use that photo. This was from our Aboriginal family gathering. They'd never met each other. And to have an event like this and pull them together and connect, that's what it's about. And that I always look to as my guiding, the guiding principle for what we do. And I would hate to think that we were doing things to underfund her education and not support her in an appropriate way. So I'm glad that finally we have something like this that is forcing everyone to be aware of that and move forward with that.
Thanks for calling your passion.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Our last speaker on the list is Vice Chair Coburn.
I'm gonna be pretty honest. I was a little sad and concerned when I heard that Mike Morgan was leaving this position, because it's a really important thing, and I just want to say I'm so impressed. That was fantastic, and I have no concerns about who's in that position, and good for you, because that's a big job. I do have a question. You brought with you a whole bunch of information on agreements, and so on the BCT agreement, I just want to make sure I understand before I get to my question. So this is a joint federal and provincial agreement with the First Nations, correct?
The First Nation Education Steering.
Okay. So
It's representing all First Nations.
all First Nations. So where does the authority of this, what government does it lie in? There's more questions coming too. Okay.
And the fairy one. I love it. There it is. It's something. Thank you. Yeah. So as I understand it, the provincial government is responsible for funding of all students who attend public schools and partially for private schools. Those students who live on reserve and attend First Nation schools fall under the care of the federal government. So the federal government is providing a great deal of funding to schools. They're providing a great deal of funding in terms of infrastructure, technology improvements. For First Nation schools on reserve. On reserve.
So then for the rest it would then fall to the provinces?
Correct. So the funding for all of our Aboriginal students comes from the provincial government. But on top, some of the funding does for those that are on reserve. It falls under the governance of the federal government, who supplies that funding to the provincial government that then sends it to us. With one of the deeper things within a local education agreement is that if one is in place, that local First Nation can, with that LEA, can then request that the federal government gives them the money directly. So for a number of our First Nations that have a large populations of students living on reserve, they may have their own school, so they'll get the funding directly there rather than having to go through the bureaucracy up to the provincial government, then to them.
So actually, I have a question.
Yeah.
It goes to the Pro D Day. Yeah. So, and I don't, know how these all work. So, is this an additional day? And I think I understand that it's just we are to take one of our days and do this. So what I'm really very interested in is in the support worker part of the Pro D Day, because I do know that a lot of our First Nations Aboriginal students are identified, and I understand the teachers need to be there and be the support, but oftentimes the closest point of contact is the support worker. So it's the Aboriginal support worker, it's the youth worker, it's the SCA, it's those people. So what's being done for them, because they really truly are that front line, especially if you're looking at identified behavior, just a totally different need. So although it's very important for the teachers to have that, it's ultimately it's important for the rest of the support staff who's surrounding this child to be equipped to do that. So I'm just wondering if there's anything in the works.
I probably misspoke earlier if I said specifically teachers. It would be for all staff. And so how we do that to value the work that they do, because you're right, in some cases the work of the Aboriginal support workers as part of our program is very different than the work of a teacher. And so making sure that Pro D is valuable to all. And like I said, it may come in the form of working together as families of schools to work specifically around supporting kids that we know are struggling. It may come in the form of presentations and workshops, and as we have done previously, kind of separating out based on our role within the district and providing appropriate. I know part of the Pro D we've even provided previously for our SEA QP staff around trauma-informed practice, which is certainly, as I've alluded to, all sorts of other reasons within our Indigenous community and within our community in general, the need for trauma-informed practice is there. So.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I was so excited to see this on the agenda at the meeting that we were at last week. The Secretary Treasurer and the Superintendent and myself, the ministry was speaking about this agreement, and when I saw that it was going to be coming forward on the agenda, I was so excited for the board and for those watching at home and those here tonight to have an opportunity to hear about this. I think that in addition to the agreement in 2020, looking at updating that agreement, the benefit from this tripartite education agreement coming into force is going to create some wonderful opportunities for us to continue on the path of truth and reconciliation. So I'm looking forward to watching the work that you're bringing back to the board, and the opportunity for our board to facilitate and support whatever we can to help implement this to benefit all the students in our district. So thank you so much, and I look forward to your next update. Back to you, Superintendent, for your next, that would be 7.1.2 professional growth plans.
Thanks, Mike. I can call on Assistant Superintendent Woody Bradford to make this presentation. Again, it's professional growth plans for our school-based administrators, of which we have one sitting here tonight. John Pusick, our LPVPA president, has been also a big part of this process. This is aligning the district action plans around literacy and transitions, which also is part of every one of our school action plans and is also part of every one of our school administrator growth plans. And we really wanted to see that alignment take place to really make a difference with our kids. And also, very importantly, to provide our administrators with feedback. And I can attest to the fact, as someone in the system quite some time, I didn't get a lot. And I needed that like everyone else. And so I really commend Woody has really played a strong leadership role in this outstanding work, along with John and others that he's worked with the team to do this, and thought a great chance tonight to share out, and also acknowledge Assistant Superintendent Mel Gill, who's not able to be here tonight, has also been a great part of this team. So looking forward to the presentation. Turn to you, Woody.
Thank you, Superintendent Stewart. I'm very excited about the opportunity to come and share with you this evening just the journey that we've been on around our professional growth plans. And the question about how do you measure growth around leadership? How do you capture that? How do you truly recognize the work that principals and vice principals do in schools is not always an easy thing to do. There's an art and a science to it. And the important piece of going through a process together with leaders in our district to create something that's going to be meaningful and purposeful for them was essential in this process. I'd like to show a video to start off that just captures our thinking, and it's a great honor for me to be here tonight to represent our principals and vice principals around the process, because it really was designing a process that would meet their individual needs, meet the school needs, and in turn meet the system's needs. So as we went on this journey, we wanted to make sure that we had clear focus on what we're doing. The intention about creating growth plans that would trickle down to ensure that students were successful in our buildings, which, as you can see in the video, designing something like this takes time. It's not something that happens overnight. It's thoughtful, it's reflective in what we're trying to do to increase our capacity as leaders to meet the needs of our students. So it's a journey. And when we started the journey, we recognized that this journey could not happen without a team in place. And through the Langley Principals and Vice Principals Association, we partnered the district leadership team with a working group to really ensure that we were going to go on a journey that was going to be successful. the goal was of this working group was to really get the process in place so that the individual principal and vice principal would see the meaning in creating these growth plans that would reflect student success in the work they were doing. The growth plan committee was established in 2016, so we've been on a 3-year journey with this process to come to a place where it's really not about the destination, it's about the journey and continual improvement in terms of what we're doing. The committee is consisted of myself and Assistant Superintendent Gill, and 4 school-based principals, 2 district-based principals, and then a representative of the Langley Principals and Vice Principals Association. And Mr. Pusik's here tonight. He's been on it the whole time in terms of the work we've been doing together. As we started as a working group, we wanted to make sure that our principals and vice principals had voice in the process. We knew that we had to build this from the ground up because this is something that we hadn't done in our district before in terms of establishing a unified approach in terms of what we're doing around professional growth plans for our principals and vice principals. We wanted to make sure that we took time at our superintendent's meetings to gather feedback from our principals and vice principals about what the process was going to look like. And the pillars that would uphold this process would be our core values in our district: courage, community, integrity, and excellence. We wanted to ensure that those were the drivers of the work we were doing as professionals to ensure that our growth plans reflected our success with students. It was really important to recognize each individual principal and vice principal was a different part in their career. And so how do we ensure that we're supporting them along that journey through this process of working to establish growth plans? The rationale was really important in terms of having clarity and understanding across the field about why would we put growth plans in place. How do we make our own personal connections to know why growth plans are something we should be doing as principals and vice principals in the field? And the research is clear that leadership is second only to classroom instruction. And we know that leadership is linked to student success. We know that our principals and vice principals truly value the work that goes on in our classrooms because we know within our classrooms we have student success. How principals and vice principals support that is critical in moving the school forward in a way of being successful for all students to be successful in their journey, in their academics, emotional, and social well-being. In establishing the rationale, we wanted to have some framework that would guide our learning as we went along. So really, what tool could we use that we could align with our professional growth plans that would really establish a framework around what is high-level leadership, not only in this district, not only in this province, but across the country in terms of what we're doing. And the BC Principals and Vice Principals Association has created leadership standards. And in these standards, they are really the framework that principals and vice principals across our district look to measure their own growth and to measure their success through different domains and different standards in terms of what they're trying to achieve. The purpose behind these standards was to be a learning framework for principals and vice principals, to really improve their practice and what they were doing. It was to provide a framework for growth plans to occur, support individual principals or vice principals in reflection on their growth, to ensure that principals and vice principals were collaborating with colleagues and district leadership teams to improve their leadership capacity and really develop the leadership capacity we wanted in the district and in the province. If you look inside the leadership standards, you will see 4 different domains and 9 standards. So you can imagine as a new principal or vice principal, this can be fairly overwhelming to start because in each of these domains and each of these standards are broken down into action statements, reflective questions, and evidence of your learning. So thinking about the role of a principal and vice principal, where are my areas of strength and where are my areas of growth? And the moral stewardship domain is a domain that talks about values and vision and mission and how do you create that as a principal or vice principal in your building. The instructional leadership is how do you drive learning forward within your building to support staff to be successful in meeting the needs of students. The relational leadership piece in terms of how do we interact with each other as professionals in the building to ensure the work we're doing is successful. And then how do we organize the building in a capacity that meets all the needs of our students in a successful way. So as we went through this process and we used this as a framework for our thinking around leadership development, we knew that we needed to pause and take time for our principals and vice principals to reflect on their own individual practice. For them to think about what are the goals that I need to accomplish in my professional growth plan that are going to really have the impact on students in the greatest amount of way. So we decided that there would be 2 platforms we would use for principals and vice principals to create these goals. There would be a professional goal and there would be a personal goal. The professional goal was a unified approach around saying that we know that in each one of our buildings, we are going to create action plans for learning or school goals that are directly linked to student success within that school. So you will know district-wide we have 2 main goals we're focusing on. One would be literacy and the other one would be successful transitions. So within each one of our schools, it was an approach that we shared with the principals and vice principals and collaboratively came up with the idea that our professional goals needed to be linked to those school goals. There had to be a tie to say that as a principal or vice principal in a building, if my school goal is around literacy and I'm supporting that goal, then my professional goal needs to be linked to that. And the other goal that we worked with our principals and vice principals was our own personal goal. And if you look inside the BC Principals and Vice Principals Leadership Standards, at the very back of the document, there's a self-assessment. There's also electronic assessment. And principals and vice principals can do a self-assessment of where they are in their learning. And through doing that assessment, they can come up with their own personal goals that they want to work on, whether it be in moral stewardship or instructional leadership, organizational leadership, or relational leadership. So we knew that the professional goal was going to be linked to one of the domains, and that was going to be instructional leadership, because we knew that that was the domain that linked directly to teaching and learning in the school, and we knew that was the one that was going to link directly to the school goal. The personal goal was really up to the principal and vice principal to decide where they wanted to go with it. But then the question you might be asking yourself, this is great, Woody, we've got goals in place, we've got personal and professional goals, but really, how do you collect evidence and data around professional growth when it comes to leadership? So, as I said earlier, this is an art and a science in terms of how you do this. How do you measure the growth of a professional in the domain of leadership in each of those different areas around instructional leadership, relational, moral stewardship, or organizational leadership? So we signified that there needed to be evidence and artifacts that we collected along this journey. So how do we really create an e-portfolio, so to speak, of artifacts that we're collecting as principals and vice principals to measure our growth? So what are the things in a building that we collect around student learning that is tied to our ability to lead a building? What things do we collect that signify that we are developing professional learning inside of our school to ensure that our staff's being successful in what they're trying to achieve? And then how do we measure things? What data are we collecting quantitatively and qualitatively that is really going to showcase the skills that we are trying to improve to better meet the needs of our students? So you think about student learning. Where does student learning happen? Student learning happens in the classroom. So we work with our principals and vice principals to develop their skills to work alongside teachers to go into classrooms and have high-level conversations about teaching and learning. And work collaboratively together to provide each other feedback in terms of what we're trying to do to develop the needs of each individual child and to meet those needs to be successful. The professional learning piece. So what are the things that you do as a principal and vice principal to uplift your staff and support them in their professional growth along with your professional growth? What are the things that you share with each other to provide feedback to develop those areas that we know will have a direct impact on improving the instructional needs in the classroom and the learning needs for our students? And then what are the pieces of data that we're collecting? What are the things that we collect as artifacts as we go along that are showcasing an improvement in student success? Whether it be numerical scores, whether it be artifacts of student work, but what are we doing to make sure we're collecting those to showcase the work we're doing to improve as a professional? So as we went through this process with our principals and vice principals, and this is the framework we were using for it, we came to a place of recognizing that every one of our principals was doing or collecting their evidence and measuring their professional goals on different platforms. And that became a bit of a challenge because we wanted to come to a place of a unified platform that would ensure that we had singly as a group, one platform to use to really measure our growth. And that's where we took our professional growth plans and put them into an electronic platform. And this is the platform we use right now with all our principals and vice principals. And all our principals and vice principals share their growth plans with myself and Assistant Superintendent Gill. And when we go into schools to visit schools to connect with students, connect with teachers, connect with our support staff, we also connect with our principals, and we have high-level conversations about what they're doing around their professional growth plans. And this platform, see if I can make it active for you. So this platform electronically, and I have Beth's permission to share her growth plan. This is what it looks like online for a principal to go in and populate, and you can see that there are different elements that are made up in the growth plan. So they establish what their purpose and vision is for their growth plan, and they share that electronically. And in each area, myself or Assistant Superintendent Gill or a colleague can provide them feedback in these areas. The self-assessment, which establishes their personal goal, those are different areas that they're working on, so the 4 different domains, and then each of these areas, you can tell the amount of work that they've done, because if you open up each one of these standards, you will see that there are artifacts within each one of these. So principals will collect these artifacts and then provide information on each of the artifacts that they're collecting. So a self-reflection, Beth's put in here obviously a vision or a values poster that connects to the work she's doing. So this was their e-portfolio through the self-assessment, and then their actual growth plans were built into the electronic version as well. So this would be an area where Mal and I could give feedback. And here would be their actual template of their professional goal and personal goal. So identify the standards, describe why you've selected the standards, an inquiry question, the different activities that they're doing to achieve that, and the evidence they're collecting. So the platform has provided us a space now that all our principals and vice principals can collect this information and share it with Assistant Superintendent Gill and myself, and also colleagues, to provide feedback. And the feedback is a formative basis. It means it's ongoing all the time in terms of what we're trying to do through the conversations we're having with them. So finally, to finish, just this is a final overview of where we are right now in terms of the whole process of professional growth plans. So as you can tell, 3 years later, this is where we are now. It's fairly comprehensive, where our district goals are the drivers in terms of what we're doing, but it's filtered through the different learning that we're doing at the district level with our principals and vice principals. We have 3 big rocks we're working on this year of improving our assessment practices and understanding within our schools, working on getting into classrooms and working alongside teachers, and then the fierce conversations in terms of what types of conversations do we have to ensure that we are having high-level professional conversations in our building. The standards are the foundation that drives our professional and personal goals through our growth plans that connect to our action plans that then lead up to our district goals as being active and fluid in terms of what we're trying to do to meet the needs of our students. So the cycle itself has evolved to a place where we've designed and created these growth plans, we've implemented them, and we've engaged all our principals and vice principals into a process that has grown into now a practice that's a habit in our district, and a habit of excellence that relies on each and every single principal and vice principal to reflect on their practice to meet the needs of their students in their schools. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's a fascinating model, and as I understand, leader in BC in this area. Is that correct?
Yeah. So we were probably one of the first districts that think the partnership we have with our principals and vice principals allowed us to really create something that they felt was meaningful to them. And as we continue to work together, it just evolved. And now, definitely at the provincial level, we're the only district that has all our principals and vice principals on the platform working collaboratively together. And we're the only district that's had our professional growth plans tied to our school action plans. So right now, actually, at the provincial level, we have principals and vice principals presenting this to other principals and vice principals of the work they're doing. So they're doing outstanding work. Yeah.
It's fantastic. We do have some questions from trustees. So our first question is from Trustee Rouse.
Thank you for the presentation. And, I've got a couple of things here. Which high schools are in your area of responsibility? If I could ask.
Four zones: LSS, Lofty, Brookswood, and Alderwood.
Good. I'll be watching them to see how they progress there. Here's a little homework for you. You're an athlete, I know, so I thought you'd really like this book. I've actually read it cover to cover, and it's all about leadership, and so it's called Captain's Class, and so I'll just leave that with you for your reading pleasure.
I'll get it now.
And I think one of the it's clear to me that excellence in leadership is key. If you're really, it's really a good investment. But I look at our department heads, that's one area we really haven't really moved ahead on, in my estimation anyway. So, I'll leave that with you. You've got lots of homework to do, but after you've done the principles, it would be really neat if we could drill down to the other leaders in the schools and see what we can do to enhance their leadership qualities. So, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
What you might want to comment, we do a lot of work with department heads, that's really a tribute to people in instructional services. I think if you want to make a comment.
Yes, Mike Pugh's department too. We've got our district leaders working with our departments in terms of developing their leadership skills to facilitate those conversations they're having in their departments, and to recognize that the heart of leadership is being able to share those responsibilities in a unified approach in terms of what you're doing within that department. So continuing to have instructional services go in, learning support services go in, and work alongside of our teachers, because we know that leadership is not defined by a title either. It's in all of us, and it's an important piece that we take time to develop the leadership in all of our employees in terms of what they're doing, and give them opportunities to find their place in leadership. And how you do that is important, and we support at the district level to ensure that that's getting down not only into our departments but also into our classrooms.
Thank you, Trustee Ross. We're going to add a new section for motions for giving staff homework under new business.
Homework and gifts.
So, our next question is Trustee Todd.
As fast as you can, as slow as you need to. At first, when I heard or read it over, we talked about growth plans. I went, "Oh, I struggle with that." But what I like in the approach that you've given is, although this is all time-consuming, I think you're trying to actually do our administrators in this district a favor by giving them a platform and giving them a place to start. We know that in many schools, administrators, their time, like they're working long hours, they're doing a lot. So when we add something else, it's always what do we give up? But I think you're kind of trying to walk maybe the balance between an efficiency and something that needs to be done. And so I appreciate that. I also appreciate your emphasis on them becoming reflective practitioners, because we know that's how you really get change in leadership. We've just rolled this out 2 to 3 years into it. Have you thought about almost adding a collaborative? I know that right now you and the other assistant superintendents, you're working with the principals, but the principals actually working together to help in their well, it's not self then reflection, but you know, where they're actually working and someone else is kind of mentoring or working with them, because I know mentorship is certainly something that we're looking at for our teachers, but also for the principals, because we want our leaders to hang around.
So it's a great question, and we do have a mentorship program for our principals and vice principals that aligns with our growth plan. So when we take the time to have those gatherings where we come together and have discussions, we pause in those moments to reflect on where we are in our growth plans, and we have our mentors and mentees working collaboratively together to have discussions in terms of what sort of evidence and artifacts are they collecting that's really reflecting their growth. We also recognize that, to your point, time is really a valuable resource we have in our buildings, and how we maximize our time to ensure that we have the natural pause to sit together and have those conversations. So we've tried to establish different opportunities and different entry points for our principals and vice principals to have that time. So whether it be at a superintendent's meeting or a network meeting, or if we arrange after school meetings where they can come, we provide dinner, or if we do retreats, or those sorts of different avenues that we have for them to say, this works for me and it balances my life outside of school with my work life. And everyone has a different entry point in terms of what works for them. So we've tried to provide a variety of different opportunities for that time to be built in to the work week, so that they can recognize really what works for them. And each time we've presented something, there are always different faces that come to the meetings, but there's always this incredible energy in the room to sit beside a colleague and have reflective conversations on leadership. And especially when you're a single building administrator, you don't necessarily always have that time to do that, right? You're doing a million different things. So to be able to sit beside a colleague and say, where are you in this area? What sort of things are you doing to support students and support your teachers, or support your staff, your support staff, and have that dialogue and then reflect on it and think about what you could do next to improve, it's truly valuable. So.
Thank you. We have one last speaker on the list. It's Trustee Ward.
Okay, there we go. More just a comment than a question, but I just applaud the district and you for doing this. You know, leadership obviously it's both bottom up and top down, and like you said, it's in all of us. And the true test of a leader is not just her ability to lead immediate staff, but to develop her leaders around her, like John Maxwell says. So I just think it's great, and if we could be a leader in other districts as far as leadership in general, we're talking the lingo, and we're not just doing it, but we're walking it, and you've got measurable steps, and you're trying to collect data. The whole thing impresses me, and I'm very grateful that you're doing this. So thank you.
Thank you, and thank you once again for the report. It was really interesting to see this, and congratulations to everybody who's involved in such an innovative opportunity for our leadership growth in our district. So once again, thank you.
Thank you.
And we do not have any more items under superintendent's reports. So we've heard from 7.1 and 7.2, the tripartite education agreement and the professional growth plans. We now need a motion that the Board of Education receives the superintendent's information item reports as presented. Could I please get a mover? Moved by Vice Chair Coburn, seconded by Trustee Todd. Any other comments or questions on these two items? Seeing none, all those in favor? It's carried. We are on to action items, which is 7.2.1 district calendars for 2019-2020, 2020-21, and 21-22. Over to you, Superintendent.
Thank you. And again, I also want to thank Assistant Superintendent Brad for outstanding presentation. Actually, both of you tonight. So really appreciate how fortunate I am to have so many great people as part of our team, and the great work we're doing. We're just seeing great dividends. So thanks again. And I'd like to, at this time, Assistant Superintendent Barry Bunyan, with our calendars. This process is, he's working with the district principal, so Sam Maraka is part of this with Barry to share out our 3-year calendar going forward. little bit of urgency around it. We have parents that like to work all kinds of plans around this, and right now we don't have that calendar set even for next year, so they're kind of anxiously waiting to get that out, and we do have a time commitment from the ministry in terms of expectations. So thank you, Barry, and I'll turn it over to you.
So first I'll talk before I get into the presentation that just to clarify, this presentation right now is not about the detailed calendar for next year. That process, as trustees are aware, most people are aware, happens in April every year. So in the April board meeting, calendars will be brought forward for the board's consideration that will detail next year's calendar. And that has all the detail that you would expect to see around parent-teacher nights, collaboration time, term end, report card dates, all of those things. That's part of the detailed calendar process. This process is a process that districts undergo once every 3 years, or our district undergoes once every 3 years. The purpose of this presentation is to initiate a consultation process, which is specified in the calendar regulation in the School Act. And these calendars, and there are obviously copies provided to trustees, I will put one up for us to refer to, does not provide the level of detail that I mentioned in April. This is simply about accounting for instructional days, accounting for vacation time, accounting for statutory holidays, and accounting for non-instructional days such as professional development days. It's done in a 3-year group, and that, as Superintendent Stewart mentioned, provides our community and our staff and everyone an opportunity to see when spring break will fall and different parts so that people can plan their lives accordingly and know with some predictability what's moving forward. So I just wanted to start off by clarifying that detailed calendars for next year do come at a later date. That's not tonight's exercise. Okay, so the calendar exercise we're going through tonight and what's being put to has to be in compliance with calendar regulations, which is part of the School Act. Specifically, we have to make sure that the minimum hours of instruction per year that are specified in the calendar regulations for each of the school years are accounted for. So the 3 district calendars that are being put forward for consultation do account for the 848 hours of kindergarten instruction, 873 hours of grades 1 to 7, and 947 hours of grade 8 to 12. This is the time that all school districts in the province have to incorporate into calendars for instructional time. The proposed district calendars only detail instructional days, non-instructional days, stat holidays, and vacation days. And as we have done every year, calendars will come forward, as I mentioned before, in April with specifics for next year. So I put only one up there for you to see. It's pretty small and kind of hard to read, but there in your package, all 3 years are detailed. So you can see there are 4 colors that, other than white that you will see up on the calendar. The blue is the instructional days. Those are the days that students go to school and learn. The red is the days where school is, the district is open, but they're non-instructional days, professional development days, school improvement days, things like that. The yellow is vacation time, winter break, spring break, summer. And the green are the statutory holidays, and they are incorporated. This happens to be the calendar for next school year, 1920, that accounts for those 4 types of days. And in your package, there is one for 2021, 21, 22. Sometimes I'm asked, why do you do 3 at a time? And again, that's to give our community an ability to see when these breaks are, moving forward. It helps for school planning, but it also helps for parents and others in the community for their own planning. So the motion that will be up on the last slide, or one of the 2 motions that will be put up on the last slide, is about the board initiating the consultation process. So these are the calendars that will be put out for consultation. Meetings will take place with employee groups by meeting directly with the human resources team. We've already reached out to our different partner groups and employee groups to arrange time to sit and meet and discuss. Information will also be posted on our district website with a link to proposed district calendars and information on how to provide feedback, provided that the motion passes tonight. That will happen first thing, either later tonight or first thing tomorrow morning. Similar information will also go out through our social media outlets. The calendar regulation requires a 30-day consultation process, so starting tomorrow, the 30-day clock will begin. That's the amount of time we need to make sure that everyone's had a chance to provide feedback. And again, as I mentioned before, detailed yearly calendars will be brought forward in April. So there are two motions recommended forward for the board to discuss. The first is that the Board of Education requests staff to begin the consultation process for the 3 district calendars that are included in your package. And again, if that's approved, that will be initiated virtually immediately. And the second motion is that the Board of Education approves the district calendars for the 3 years, subject to minor revisions based on feedback received as a result of the 30-day consultation. Our experience in the district calendar process is we put it out for consultation, and because we're only talking about stat holidays, which can't change, vacation, which is fairly static as well, instructional and non-instructional times, we tend to get very little feedback from people because you can't move stat holidays, you know, those kinds of things. But sometimes we might get something we don't know, and this allows trustees to basically approve the calendars unless there is significant feedback we're getting that's saying that there are concerns and those kinds of things. So there isn't a lot of detail in these calendars to provide, so that's the end of my presentation. With the April one, there'll obviously be a lot more to discuss at this point. So I open it up for any questions.
So thank you very much. And we do have a speakers list. First speaker is Trustee Wilson.
Yes, okay.
Oh, there it goes. So I noticed on your 2019-2020 calendar, it has November 8th, 2019 as a single vacation day.
It's similar to this year's situation where there's 181 days and 1 day is a closure day. And we've already reached out to our employee groups about that and working on what we will do as a result of that, just like we did this year.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other speakers? Marty, you're still buzzed in. Do you have another question? No? No? Okay. So I don't, it just happened. I don't have any other speakers, so we'll start with the first motion, which is that the Board of Education requests staff to begin the consultation process for the district calendars for 2019-20, 2020-21, and 2021-22. Could I please get a mover? Moved by Trustee Ward, seconded by Trustee Ross. Any other comments or questions? You're next up, David, don't worry. We have to rotate between you two. I don't see any other speakers. All those in favor? It's carried. All right, so we do have a second motion. The 30-day consultation period ends during spring break. So we have a motion that would move forward the consultation process subject to feedback. It would be approved if there were no feedback. So let's move to this motion. So the first motion is, or the second motion, sorry, is that the Board of Education approves the district calendars for 2019-20, 2020-21, and 2021-22, subject to minor revisions based on feedback received as a result of the 30-day consultation. So let's get that moved and then we can talk about that. So could I please get a mover? Moved by Trustee Ross, seconded by Trustee Todd. Any questions or comments? I will, before we open that, actually ask the superintendent to explain the timelines on that and the background on this motion.
We don't tend to get much conversation or in terms of feedback around this particular one. We get more on the school-based ones once those come out in April. So subject to not receiving much in terms of feedback, we would submit for April 1st our calendar.
And then should there be feedback that comes in on this one, as the superintendent mentioned, if there was where we tend to get more on the April one where you're starting to add in the dates, if there was a lot of feedback on that, then we would have to call a meeting and come back to debate and discuss. If there wasn't any feedback, then we would approve these tentative to the April ones where we would get more detail in order to meet the requirements of the ministry. Do you have a speaker on that, Trustee Wilson?
So would we then be voting right now that we would approve these calendars as they are, and then unless there was some significant feedback, we would meet again?
Exactly. So if staff received a significant amount of feedback on this, these proposed general calendars ahead of the ones like I mentioned that we'll be approving in April, then we would call a meeting as a board. We would receive that feedback, and then we would hold a one-item agenda, which we are allowed to do on our board policy. With that, it becomes a special meeting. We serve 3 days notice. We are allowed to discuss one item. You're not allowed to discuss anything else. We would have to wait for the 30 days feedback to end. We would then come back during spring break, hold a standalone meeting on these calendars, because we do have to meet that ministry deadline. If there was no feedback from the community, or it was something that was minor and staff could just make that change, then we would not be calling a special one-item meeting. Our next meeting that we could attach onto would be April the 9th, which is past the ministry's cutoff.
Right.
We would have to call a meeting on, I believe it was the 1st. So we have that placeholder if we need to. We will come back and hold a one-item agenda.
Okay. I don't feel comfortable passing the motion as the calendar sits, not knowing what that vacation day on November 8th, 2019 will look like, or who will be paid and what would happen that day.
Okay, well, we'll see if there's any other speakers. If there is any concern on that, we can discuss that. Otherwise, we'll have to call a one-item agenda item. Are there any other speakers on this item? Okay.
Sure.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Trustee Todd.
Sure. So I understand the mechanics of it, that we need to pass something. But I'm also hesitant too, just on principle, about passing something that you're sending out. It's almost like presuming an outcome before it is. So I tend to also agree with Trustee Wilson that unfortunately, and I might be one of those people that spring break, I'll have to make a special effort to get back. But so you're talking April 1st special meeting, or March 27th, or what date are we talking?
It's Friday, and we can bring everyone back. I'm around.
All right, so that's fine. We would need to defeat this motion, and then we will call a one-item special agenda to come back. This one's one that we put out as an option, so it would be, this is a broader one. We can approve a tentative on feedback or come back. Either way is fine. That's the will of the board, but definitely one we wanted to put out to discuss. Trustee Ross.
I'm confident with us voting on it tonight, so that's my personal feel on it. But if the will of the board is to wait, I'll wait too.
Trustee Coburn.
Forward.
The motion that's on the floor would be that we would approve this subject to minor revisions. So the qualifier is the minor, approving it tentative to minor revisions.
But the one we're voting on now is that we approve it. And should it be, does it have to be unanimous?
No,
Okay.
no, not at all. Yeah. So the motion right now is that the Board of Education approves the district calendars for the 2019-20, 2020-21, 2021-22 subject to minor revisions based on feedback received as a result of the 30-day consultation. I've heard some trustees are concerned about doing that ahead of time. So our vote would be whether we would do that or call a special standalone meeting. So if this is defeated, then the action would be that after the 30-day period lapses, we would come back for a special meeting to vote on it as a one-item meeting. So all those in favor? All those opposed? The motion is carried. So we are moving on to our committee reports, which is the Education Committee. And the Education Committee is that the first item is the annual review of special academy fees. So we're going to hand that over to Trustee Todd.
Thank you. So, I don't know, does it show up there? Basically, the Education Committee meeting met last week, Tuesday, February 19th, and we do have a number of recommendations. Especially academy fees are additional fees for things like our hairdressing or the DW Poppy, the musical theater, the equestrian, the fine arts, special arts thing, and we are looking at a recommendation that the Education Committee recommends that the board approves the fees for specialty academies for the 2019-2020 school year, and so therefore asking that be moved.
Okay, so Trustee Todd has moved the recommendation. Could we please get a seconder? Seconded by Vice Chair Coburn. Any comments?
Is there any questions?
Would you like to speak to it, I guess, first? Sorry, Trustee Todd.
Yeah, this is for the most part a housekeeping a matter that needs to get done now because we have to start thinking about next year. I believe these fees are there's inflationary, but I'm not aware of any that are going up in this one.
The only one is the only one going up is the Edge Academy because of I think it was $50. I got to try to remember in terms of inflationary and a new course that's being added to Langley Fine Arts. Those are the only changes from previous fees.
Thank you.
Okay, so I do not see any speakers to this motion. So the motion that is on the floor is that the Education Committee recommends that the Board of Education approves the fees for specialty academies for the 2019-2020 school year as presented. All those in favor? That was unanimous, so none opposed. The motion is carried. Right, so we're on to 8.1.2, Annual Review of International Baccalaureate Fees.
Once again, Langley School District is very fortunate, blessed to have the IB program up at RE Mountain. We do an annual review, and we looked at our fees, and due to the fact that there was some currency exchange issues the last little while, of course, we are aware that the Canadian dollar is not doing as well versus the US dollar, and we do pay our fees, the exam fees in American dollars, so we had to do some adjustment there. So there is a recommendation included in the report to, and there's no change in the fee structure, yeah, but there is, it's US dollars, so just to make you aware of that. So the recommendation is the Education Committee recommends the board approves the fee structure for the IB program at RE Mountain Secondary for the 2019-2020 school year as presented.
All right, thank you. So that was moved by Trustee Todd. Can we please get a seconder? The seconder is Trustee Ross. Trustee Todd, do you have any more that you'd like to add to this motion?
No? Any questions?
No.
Seeing none?
Okay, so seeing no questions and motion on the floor is that the Education Committee recommends that the Board of Education approves the fee structure for the International Baccalaureate Program at RE Mountain Secondary for the 2019-2020 school year as presented. All those in favor? It's carried unanimously, so there's no opposed. The motion is carried. And we are now on to, so thank you, Trustee Todd, for those two items. We are now on to the Policy Committee with Trustee Wilson, and there is one policy, Policy 1401, Trustee Expenses. So over to you, Trustee Wilson.
Thank you. So I will read the motion and then we can have discussion if we need to. So the motion is that the Policy Committee recommends the Board of Education serves notice of motion to the district's education community and its education partner groups that it intends to adopt the revised policy number 1401, trustee expenses, at the April 30th, 2019 regular board meeting.
Yeah. So thank you, Trustee Wilson. You've moved that. Could I please get a seconder to the motion? Seconded by Vice Chair Coburn. Over to you, Trustee Wilson, to speak to the motion.
There we go. In going through some of our policies, we have found that many are outdated and needing updating. I believe this one has been 17 years, it looked like. 2002 was its last update, or when it was last looked at. So basically we've found that we have credit cards now, so the form was a little bit outdated. There was a few things about it, and so we've just brought it in line with responsible accounting practices. So I think that's about it.
Thank you, Trustee Wilson. Are there any questions on this item that's going out for notice of motion? Trustee Wilson, do you want to add anything to this one? Are you good? All right, so we have a mover and a seconder. So all those in favor? It's unanimous. The motion's carried. And we do not have any new business, but we do have trustee comments. Next, number 10. So this time I will start on my far left with Trustee Wilson. Do you have any trustee comments?
In the interest of time, I will skip my comments. Have a great night.
Sorry, Trustee Ross.
Well, I think I'll talk for a while. No. I think there's a lot of wisdom in not saying anything.
Trustee Todd.
Thank you and good night to our public.
So over to my far right, Trustee Ward. Vice Chair Coburn. Oh, you're not going to like me. Okay, I got a few. Okay, so just very quickly, we in the Langleys each year, MP Mark Warawa hosts the Langley Environmental Hero Awards. You will see that one coming out through the district and in other places within the community. There are 3 categories: one for youth, one for an individual, and one for an organization or business. Please check it out, and the deadline for nomination is April 19th, 2019. So if you know an environmental hero, somebody who's made a significant contribution in our community, please nominate them. This will be MP Warawa's last year hosting these, as he's not going to be seeking re-election. So it would be wonderful for there to be a large body of people to choose from for this award. I know it means a lot to him. The next item is that there are currently, their nominations are open for the Premier's Awards for Excellence in Education. So if you know, and I'm sure in our district there are many, an educator who has exhibited excellence in the area, March 31st, 2019 is the nomination deadline there. Also, in our next regular meeting of the board, when we come back on March the 12th, we will be discussing a request from the ministry for feedback from the funding model review, as our board has been requested to provide feedback by the deadline of March the 30th. So we will be discussing at that regular meeting the response from our district to that. And just very quickly, this past week we attended on February 22nd the annual partner liaison meeting, and we did receive a funding model review update, the BC Tripartite Education Agreement update, and a collective bargaining one. So 60 board chairs came together with our secretary, treasurers, and superintendents from throughout the province. We had a wonderful joint meeting, and in that we had many discussions. At the next meeting, I will be adding an item to go over some of the items we discussed to ensure that my fellow trustees are up to date on some of the things coming down from that. Provincial Council, we also had a discussion on the funding model review. That's been the theme this year. There are concerns about some of the changes that are coming forward as proposed. So, going from to a head count model, or changing other fundings and how that could negatively affect districts. And our last item is that our new trustees, so Trustee Perot, Trustee Wilson, and Trustee Ward, and myself, along with the Secretary and Superintendent, attended the BCSTA leadership training, where we looked over some of our governing documents. It was an excellent experience, and the knowledge gained as trustees we're going to be bringing back to the board to help with our governance leadership and to share that knowledge with our fellow trustees. So in a future strategic planning meeting, we'll be covering that. And it was quite an interesting weekend, or sorry, 2 days of learning, and it was wonderful to be able to be a part of that. So that is a chair update in sort of 2 minutes, because I know everybody wants to go home, but these items will be, over the next couple of months, we'll be talking about them more. Other than that, I hope everybody has a wonderful night, and to those, I know there's lots of you watching at home, thank you for tuning in. Have a great night. Have to go to question period. So question period is provided at board meetings for the public to ask questions of clarification. The board welcomes questions from the public and wants to ensure that those wishing to ask questions can also do so. So the just some ground rules. Needs to be directed to the chair and not to staff. Needs to be related directly to the topic on the agenda. Needs to be succinct, focused, and not a statement. May not be asked that are related to a personnel or directed at an individual trustee. And finally, may not be asked if they are related to contract negotiations. So this is in line with our board policy 1204, bylaws of the board. So I will open it up and see if there are any questions for tonight's question period. Going twice. Going 3 times. Seeing no questions, I will need a motion to adjourn at 9:32. Woo! Okay, moved by Vice Chair Coburn, seconded by Trustee Ward. All those in favor? Good night, everybody.